Flight 829 was flying smoothly through the clear morning sky when suddenly, everything changed. Captain David Reynolds and his co-pilot heard a strange noise. Then both engines stopped working at the same time. The plane started falling from 40,000 feet with 284 passengers inside. Everyone was scared. Then a 16-year-old girl named Emma stood up and walked to the front. She said 5 words that shocked everyone: "I know how to land this." Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Captain David Reynolds woke up at 5:30 a.m. that Tuesday morning. He was 52 years old and had been flying planes for 26 years. He had flown over 15,000 hours in his career. He was known as one of the best pilots in the airline. Other pilots respected him. Passengers felt safe when they knew he was flying their plane. David lived in Chicago with his wife Karen and their 2 sons. His older son was in college studying engineering. His younger son was in high school and loved basketball. David had a simple routine. He would wake up early, have coffee, kiss his wife goodbye, and drive to the airport. Today was supposed to be just another normal flight. That morning, Karen had made him breakfast like she always did. Scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh orange juice. They sat together at the kitchen table, talking about their plans for the weekend. David was scheduled to be home by Thursday evening. They were planning to go out for dinner to celebrate their 28th wedding anniversary. "Be safe up there," Karen said as he got ready to leave. She always said this. Every single time he left for a flight. It was her way of saying, "I love you," without actually saying it. "Always am," David replied with a smile, kissing her forehead. "I'll call you when I land in Los Angeles." He didn't know that this simple morning routine, this normal Tuesday breakfast, would be the last normal moment of his day. He had no idea that in just a few hours, he would face the most terrifying situation of his entire career. But that's how life works sometimes. The biggest challenges come on the most ordinary days. He arrived at O'Hare International Airport 2 hours before the flight. This was his habit. He never rushed. He believed that being early and careful kept everyone safe. He met his co-pilot, Michael Torres, in the crew room. Michael was 38 years old and had been flying for 12 years. They had flown together many times before. They worked well as a team. "Good morning, Captain," Michael said with a smile. "Weather looks perfect today. Clear skies all the way to Los Angeles." David nodded. "That's good. Let's do our checks and make sure everything is ready." They reviewed the flight plan together. The flight from Chicago to Los Angeles would take about 4 hours. They would fly at 40,000 feet, which is normal for this type of plane. The plane was a Boeing 777, one of the most reliable planes ever made. This particular plane was only 6 years old and had excellent maintenance records. David walked around the plane to inspect it. He always did this before every flight. He checked the engines, the wings, the wheels, and everything else he could see. He looked for any damage, any leaks, or anything unusual. Everything looked perfect. The maintenance crew told him that all systems were working normally. The plane had been checked the night before and everything passed inspection. Inside the cockpit, David and Michael went through their pre-flight checklist. They tested all the instruments, checked the fuel levels, and made sure all the computer systems were working. The fuel tanks were full. All the backup systems were ready. Everything was exactly as it should be. At 7:45 a.m., passengers started boarding Flight 829. They came from all different places and were traveling for many different reasons. There was a businessman named Mr. Chen who was going to an important meeting in Los Angeles. There was a young couple, Sarah and Tom, who were going on their honeymoon. There was an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson who was flying to see her new grandchild for the first time. In the back of the plane, a family of 4 was settling into their seats. The parents, Mark and Jennifer Williams, were taking their 2 children to Disneyland. The kids, ages 8 and 10, were very excited. They had been talking about this trip for months. In seat 34B, a teenage girl sat quietly by the window. Her name was Emma Parker, and she was 16 years old. She was traveling alone to Los Angeles to visit her uncle. Emma had short brown hair and was wearing a simple blue hoodie. She carried a backpack that seemed important to her. She held it close and wouldn't let anyone put it in the overhead bin. Emma looked nervous, but not because she was afraid of flying. She was thinking about her father. Her father, Robert Parker, had been a military pilot and aviation engineer. He had died in a helicopter accident 2 years ago when Emma was 14. Since his death, Emma had spent countless hours studying his notebooks and research papers. Her father had been working on emergency procedures for situations that regular pilots never practiced. The day her father died was the worst day of Emma's life. She remembered getting the phone call from her mother. She remembered collapsing on the floor, unable to breathe, unable to believe that her hero was gone. Her father had been everything to her. He taught her about planes, about engineering, about problem solving. He always told her, "Emma, your brain is your greatest tool. Never stop learning. Never stop questioning." After his death, Emma fell into a deep sadness. She stopped going to school for weeks. She stopped seeing her friends. She barely ate. Her mother was worried about her. But then one day, Emma found her father's research notebooks in his office. There were dozens of them, filled with calculations, diagrams, and theories about aviation safety. Emma started reading them. At first, it was just a way to feel close to her father again. But then she became fascinated by his work. He had spent years developing procedures for emergencies that most pilots never even considered. His work was brilliant but incomplete. He had died before he could test most of his theories. Emma made a decision that day. She would finish her father's work. She would study everything he had written. She would understand it completely. It became her mission, her purpose. For 2 years, she spent every free moment studying aviation engineering, flight dynamics, and emergency procedures. She taught herself things that college students didn't learn until their 3rd or 4th year. Her mother worried that Emma was obsessing over her father's death. Her friends thought she was wasting her teenage years studying instead of having fun. But Emma didn't care. This was how she kept her father alive. This was how she honored his memory. She never imagined that all those hours of study would actually matter. She never thought she would be on a plane when both engines failed. But somehow, the universe had a plan for her. At 8:15 a.m., Flight 829 pushed back from the gate. The plane taxied slowly to the runway. David and Michael talked to air traffic control and received permission to take off. The plane lined up on the runway. David pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared. The plane accelerated down the runway, faster and faster. At 180 miles per hour, David pulled back on the controls and the nose lifted up. The wheels left the ground. They were flying. The plane climbed steadily into the sky. Chicago got smaller and smaller below them. The plane passed through some thin clouds at 10,000 feet. Then they were above the clouds in clear blue sky. The climb continued smoothly. 15,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 25,000 feet. Inside the cabin, flight attendants began moving through the aisles. They offered drinks and snacks to passengers. Most people were relaxed. Some were reading books. Some were watching movies on their screens. Some were sleeping. The young couple on their honeymoon was holding hands and looking out the window. The children going to Disneyland were playing games on their tablets. Emma sat quietly, looking out the window. She watched the ground far below. She could see farms, roads, and small towns. She thought about her father. She remembered when he took her flying in a small plane when she was 12. He had let her hold the controls for a moment. She remembered how excited she felt. She remembered how he explained everything about how planes work. Always remember, Emma, he had told her, flying is about understanding systems. If you understand how everything works together, you can solve almost any problem. At the time, she didn't know how important those words would become. At 9:47 a.m., Flight 829 reached 40,000 feet. This was their cruising altitude. The plane leveled off. Everything was normal. David set the autopilot and relaxed slightly. This was always the easy part of the flight. Just maintain altitude and speed, monitor the systems, and enjoy the smooth flying. Michael was updating their position to air traffic control. Denver Center, Flight 829 level at 40,000, maintaining course. Roger, Flight 829, the controller responded. Continue as filed. David took a sip of coffee. He was thinking about his younger son's basketball game that evening. He would miss it because of this flight, but he would be home tomorrow. He made a mental note to call his son later. Then he heard something wrong. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But David had 26 years of experience. He knew the sound of his engines. He knew exactly how they should sound. And something was different. There was a small vibration. A tiny change in the engine tone. Do you hear that? David asked Michael, setting down his coffee. Hear what? Michael replied, listening carefully. The left engine. Something sounds. He didn't finish his sentence. The vibration suddenly got worse. Much worse. The plane shook. Warning lights started flashing on the instrument panel. The left engine's power was dropping rapidly. Engine failure, left side. David said quickly. His training took over immediately. He started following emergency procedures. He reached for the engine controls. But then something impossible happened. The right engine failed too. Both engines stopped at exactly the same time. The warning alarms were loud in the cockpit. Red lights flashed everywhere. And then there was a sound that no pilot ever wants to hear, silence. The powerful roar of the jet engines was gone. Completely gone. The plane was now 40,000 feet above the ground with no engines. It was gliding, but it was also falling. Without engine power, the plane couldn't maintain altitude. It would keep descending until it hit the ground. This can't be happening, Michael said, his voice shaking. Both engines don't fail at the same time. It's not possible. But it was happening. David's mind was racing. He had trained for engine failures many times in flight simulators. But losing one engine was very different from losing both. A plane can fly with one engine. It can even land safely with one engine. But with no engines at all, the plane becomes a very heavy glider. And commercial jets are not designed to glide very well. Mayday, 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 David said into the radio. Denver Center, this is Flight 829. We have dual engine failure at 40,000 feet. Both engines are out. We are declaring an emergency. There was a pause. Even the air traffic controller seemed shocked. Flight 829, say again. Both engines have failed, David repeated, his voice steady despite the situation. We have no power. We are descending. We need immediate assistance. Roger, Flight 829, the controller said, his voice now urgent. We are alerting emergency services. The nearest airport is Denver International, about 85 miles ahead of you. Can you make it? Michael was already calculating. He looked at their altitude, their descent rate, and the distance to Denver. He did the math quickly in his head. His face went pale. We're descending at 2,000 feet per minute, Michael said quietly. At this rate, We'll be at 10,000 feet in 15 minutes. We'll hit the ground in 20 minutes. Denver is too far. We can't make it. David knew Michael was right. They were too high and too far away. Without engines, they were falling too fast. They needed a miracle. In the passenger cabin, people noticed something was wrong. The plane had shaken violently. Then the engine noise stopped. The plane's nose pointed down slightly as it began descending faster. Flight attendant Jessica Martinez, who had been working for the airline for 9 years, immediately knew this was serious. She picked up the phone to call the cockpit. "Captain, what's happening?" she asked. "Passengers are asking questions." "Jessica, I need you to stay calm," David said. "We have an engine problem. Tell the passengers we're descending to a lower altitude as a precaution. Don't cause panic. I'll make an announcement in a moment." But Jessica could hear the tension in his voice. She had flown with Captain Reynolds many times. He was always calm. If he sounded worried, things were very bad. She hung up the phone and tried to smile at the passengers. "Everything is fine," she said. "We're just adjusting our altitude. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But people weren't convinced. The businessman, Mr. Chen, had flown hundreds of times. He knew this didn't feel normal. The honeymoon couple looked scared. The mother, Jennifer, held her children close. Her daughter was crying softly. "Mommy, what's wrong with the plane?" the little girl asked. "Nothing, sweetheart," Jennifer lied, holding her tighter. "Everything will be okay." But her hands were shaking as she said it. An older man in seat 22A, a retired Air Force pilot named Colonel Matthews, also knew something was seriously wrong. He had flown fighter jets for 20 years. He knew the sound of engine failure. And he knew that losing both engines was almost unheard of. He closed his eyes and said a quiet prayer for the pilots up front. They were going to need all the skill and luck they could get. Near the back of the plane, a young woman named Rachel was crying. She was 23 years old and had just gotten her dream job in Los Angeles. She was supposed to start next week. Now she wondered if she would even make it there. She thought about her parents back home. She wished she had hugged them longer before she left. The cabin was filled with quiet fear. Some people were praying. Some were crying. Some were holding hands with strangers sitting next to them. Everyone could feel that something terrible was happening, even if they didn't know exactly what it was. Emma, in seat 34B, immediately understood what was happening. She had studied engine failures extensively. She knew the sound of engines stopping. She knew what it meant when both engines failed at the same time. She looked at her watch and started calculating in her head. Altitude, 40,000 feet. Descent rate, probably around 2,000 feet per minute based on the angle. Time until impact, approximately 20 minutes, maybe less. Her heart was pounding. She opened her backpack and pulled out one of her father's notebooks. She flipped through the pages quickly, looking for something specific. Her father had written about dual-engine failures. He had developed a theory about how to restart engines in certain situations. The theory had never been tested in real life, but her father believed it could work. Emma's hands were shaking as she read. Could this actually work? Should she even try? She was just a 16-year-old girl. Who would listen to her? But then she thought about everyone on this plane. The couple going on their honeymoon, the children going to Disneyland, the grandmother going to meet her grandchild. Nearly 300 people whose lives were about to end if someone didn't do something. She made a decision. Emma unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The flight attendant, Jessica, immediately walked toward her. "Miss, please sit down and fasten your seatbelt," Jessica said firmly. "I need to talk to the pilots," Emma said. Her voice was quiet but serious. "That's not possible right now. Please sit." Both engines have failed, Emma interrupted. I know what caused it, and I know how to fix it. I need to talk to them right now. Jessica stared at this teenage girl. How could you possibly know that? My father was an aviation engineer and a military pilot, Emma said quickly. He spent years researching emergency procedures for situations exactly like this. I've studied all his work. Please, we don't have much time. Jessica hesitated. This seemed crazy. But something in Emma's eyes convinced her. This girl wasn't joking. She wasn't crazy. She genuinely believed she could help. Come with me, Jessica said. They walked quickly to the front of the plane. Jessica knocked on the cockpit door using the emergency code. David opened it slightly, looking annoyed. Jessica, we're very busy right now, he said. Captain, this passenger says she knows what happened to the engines, Jessica said. I think you should listen to her. David looked past Jessica at Emma. He saw a teenage girl in a blue hoodie, holding a worn notebook. This had to be a joke. But he didn't have time to argue. Young lady, please go back to your seat, David said. We're handling the situation. You have about 17 minutes before this plane hits the ground, Emma said calmly. Your engines didn't fail because of mechanical problems. They shut down automatically because the hydraulic pressure dropped below the safety threshold. It was probably caused by a bird strike that damaged a hydraulic line. The safety system shut down both engines to prevent a potential explosion. David and Michael stared at her with their mouths open. How could she possibly know that? Who are you? David asked. My name is Emma Parker. My father was Robert Parker. He was a test pilot and aviation engineer. He died 2 years ago, but he left me all his research. He developed a procedure for restarting engines after this exact type of failure. I've studied it hundreds of times. David remembered that name. Robert Parker had been famous in aviation circles. He was known for developing innovative emergency procedures. He had died in an accident, and his work was never fully completed. Even if you're right about what happened, Michael said, we've already tried to restart the engines. Nothing works. The standard procedures aren't working. That's because you're using standard procedures, Emma said. But this isn't a standard failure. You need to use my father's technique. It's complicated, and we only have one chance to do it correctly. If I'm wrong, we're in the same situation we're already in. But if I'm right, we can restart the engines. David looked at Michael. They were at 32,000 feet now, still descending. They had tried everything they knew. Nothing had worked. What did they have to lose? All right, David said. Tell us what to do. Emma stepped into the cockpit. She put her father's notebook on the center console and opened it to a specific page. The page was covered in diagrams, calculations, and handwritten notes. First, we need to understand what happened, Emma explained quickly. When the hydraulic pressure dropped, the engine computer detected a potential danger. It automatically shut down both engines as a safety measure. But the engines themselves are probably fine. The problem is that the computer won't let them restart because it still detects low hydraulic pressure. So how do we override the safety system? Michael asked. We don't override it, Emma said. We trick it. We need to use the auxiliary power unit to temporarily boost the hydraulic pressure. When the pressure reaches the normal level, the computer will think the problem is fixed. Then we can restart the engines normally. But the timing has to be perfect. David looked at the altitude indicator. They were at 28,000 feet now. How long will this take? About 6 minutes if we do it right, Emma said. Maybe longer if we make a mistake. We need to start now. Emma began giving instructions. She told them which switches to flip, which buttons to press, and in what order. David and Michael followed her instructions exactly. They had no reason to trust this teenager, except that she knew things she shouldn't know. She understood systems that took years of training to learn. "Start the auxiliary power unit now," Emma said, looking at her father's notes. Michael pressed the button. The APU started running. It was designed to provide backup electrical power, but Emma's father had discovered it could also be used to boost hydraulic pressure temporarily. "Watch the hydraulic pressure gauge," Emma said. "When it reaches 3,200 psi, you have exactly 4 seconds to initiate the engine start sequence. If you wait too long, the pressure will drop again and we'll have to start over. But we only have enough power to try this twice. After that, the APU will be depleted." The tension in the cockpit was incredible. David's hands were sweating. Michael was breathing heavily. Emma was watching the gauges carefully, her finger pointing to the hydraulic pressure indicator. The needle was rising. 2,800 psi.2, 900 psi.3, 000 psi. "Get ready," Emma said. 3,100 psi.3, 150 psi. "Now!" Emma shouted. David pressed the engine start button for the right engine. For a moment, nothing happened. The plane continued falling. They were at 24,000 feet. Then they heard a sound. A wonderful, beautiful sound. The right engine was starting. The turbines began spinning. Fuel started flowing. Ignition occurred. The engine roared to life. "It's working!" Michael yelled. "Engine 1 is restarting." The plane's descent slowed immediately. With one engine running, they had some power back. But they still needed the second engine. "We have to wait 30 seconds before trying the second engine," Emma said, checking her notes. "If we try too soon, we won't have enough hydraulic pressure for both engines." Those 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes. David kept the plane as level as possible with one engine. They were at 22,000 feet now, but the descent rate had decreased significantly. "Okay," Emma said, watching the gauges. "The hydraulic pressure has stabilized. Let's try the left engine." Same procedure. Wait for 3,200 psi, then start immediately. They watched the hydraulic gauge again. The APU was working hard. The needle climbed slowly. 3,000 psi.3, 100 psi. "Almost there," Emma said. 3,150 psi.3, 200 psi. "Now!" David pressed the start button for the left engine. Again, there was a moment of terrible silence. Then the engine began to turn. Faster and faster, ignition, power. Both engines were running. The plane stopped descending. David pulled back gently on the controls. The nose came up. They began climbing again. The warning alarms stopped. The red lights went off. The cockpit was suddenly quiet except for the beautiful sound of both engines running normally. "Denver Center, this is Flight 829, David said into the radio, his voice shaking with emotion. "We have successfully restarted both engines. Repeat, both engines are now operating normally. We are climbing back to a safe altitude." There was a pause. Then the controller's voice came back, also filled with emotion. "Flight 829, that's wonderful news. That's incredible. We're showing both your engines back online. How did you do it?" David looked at Emma, who was standing quietly in the corner of the cockpit, still holding her father's notebook. "We had some help," David said simply. David decided to land at Denver International Airport as quickly as possible, even though the engines were working again. He didn't want to take any chances. The plane descended normally this time, with full power. The landing was smooth and perfect. As soon as the plane stopped on the runway, emergency vehicles surrounded it. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars were everywhere. But everyone on board was safe. Not a single person was injured. When the passengers were told what had happened, they couldn't believe it. Both engines had failed. They had been minutes from crashing. And a teenage girl had saved them all. Emma tried to stay quiet and avoid attention, but Jessica told everyone what had happened. The passengers wanted to thank her. Many people were crying with relief and gratitude. The mother, Jennifer, hugged Emma tightly. "You saved my children," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Her 2 children also hugged Emma. The little girl, who was only 8 years old, looked up at Emma with wide eyes. "Are you a superhero?" she asked innocently. Emma smiled through her tears. "No, sweetie. I'm just someone who studied really hard." "You're my superhero," the little girl said firmly. And then she gave Emma her favorite toy, a small stuffed elephant. "I want you to have this. To remember us." Emma accepted the gift, holding it carefully. She knew she would keep it forever. The businessman, Mr. Chen, shook Emma's hand formally. "You are a remarkable young lady," he said. "I will never forget this. I have a daughter your age. I'm going home to hug her and tell her she can do anything she sets her mind to. Because of you." The elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, held Emma's hand gently. "You're an angel," she said with tears in her eyes. "God sent you on this plane for a reason. You saved us all." The retired Air Force Colonel, Matthews, approached Emma with respect. He saluted her. "I've flown combat missions and dangerous operations," he said. "But what you did today took more courage than anything I've ever seen. Your father would be so proud. And I'm honored to have been saved by you." Even the young woman Rachel, who had been so scared, came to thank Emma. "I get to start my new job now because of you," she said, hugging Emma. "I get to live my life because you were brave enough to speak up. Thank you doesn't seem like enough, but thank you." David and Michael also thanked Emma personally. "I've been flying for 26 years, David said, "and I've never seen anything like this. You saved 284 lives today. Your father would be incredibly proud of you." Emma felt tears coming to her eyes. "My father always said that knowledge should be used to help people," she said quietly. "I'm just glad I remembered what he taught me." The Federal Aviation Administration immediately started an investigation. They wanted to know exactly what had happened and why. Engineers examined the plane carefully. They found that Emma was completely correct. A bird strike had damaged a hydraulic line shortly after takeoff. The line had slowly leaked hydraulic fluid during the climb. When the pressure dropped below the safety level, the engine computer automatically shut down both engines to prevent a possible explosion. The investigators were amazed. "This failure sequence has never been documented before," one engineer said. "And this restart procedure doesn't exist in any manual. Where did this girl learn this?" When they reviewed Robert Parker's research notes, they understood. Emma's father had predicted this exact scenario years ago. He had developed the restart procedure theoretically, but it had never been tested. Until now. The aviation industry was shocked by the story. News channels around the world reported on the teenage girl who saved a plane. Emma became famous overnight. Everyone wanted to interview her. She appeared on news programs, talk shows, and documentaries. But Emma remained humble. "I just did what my father taught me," she said in every interview. "He was the genius. I just remembered what he wrote." Because of Emma and her father's work, the aviation industry made important changes. Robert Parker's emergency procedures were officially added to pilot training programs. The FAA published new guidelines for handling hydraulic failures. Boeing updated their maintenance procedures to better detect hydraulic damage. Flight schools started teaching about the Parker procedure, named after Emma's father. Pilots around the world learned the technique that had saved Flight 829. Aviation experts estimated that the procedure could potentially save thousands of lives in the future. Emma was invited to speak at aviation conferences and universities. She met with Boeing engineers and FAA officials. She helped them understand her father's other research. Some of his other theories were also adopted into official procedures. When Emma turned 18, she was offered a full scholarship to study aerospace engineering at MIT, one of the best universities in the world. The airline company also gave her free flights for life. "You can fly with us whenever you want," the CEO said. "You're our hero." Emma accepted the scholarship and went to MIT. She studied hard and graduated top of her class 4 years later. She then went to work for NASA, helping to develop emergency procedures for spacecraft. Later, she became a test pilot, just like her father. Throughout her career, Emma kept her father's notebooks. She continued studying his work and implementing his ideas. She became one of the most respected aerospace engineers in the world. She developed new safety systems that saved countless lives. But she never forgot Flight 829. Every year on the anniversary of that day, she visited Captain David Reynolds and his family. They became close friends. David eventually retired from flying, but he always told people about the amazing teenage girl who saved his plane. Emma also stayed in contact with many of the passengers from Flight 829. The honeymoon couple, Sarah and Tom, invited her to their baby's christening. The children who were going to Disneyland sent her letters every year, thanking her for saving them. Mrs. Patterson sent her cookies every Christmas until she passed away peacefully at age 92. 20 years after the incident, Emma gave a speech at an aviation safety conference. She was now 36 years old, an accomplished pilot and engineer. She stood at the podium and looked at the audience of hundreds of pilots, engineers, and aviation professionals. "My father once told me that knowledge is only valuable if we use it to help others," Emma said. "On Flight 829, I was able to use what he taught me to save lives. But the real lesson is this: never stop learning. Never stop preparing. You never know when your knowledge might be the thing that saves someone's life." My father died before he could see his research save anyone. But his ideas lived on through his notebooks. And those ideas saved 284 people that day. So remember, the work you do matters. The knowledge you gain matters. And the legacy you leave behind might save lives long after you're gone. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. The story of Flight 829 taught the world several important lessons. First, age doesn't matter when it comes to knowledge and ability. Emma was only 16, but she knew things that experienced pilots didn't know. Sometimes young people can solve problems that adults cannot. Second, the work we do today might help people in the future in ways we can't predict. Robert Parker never knew that his research would save a plane full of people. But because he dedicated his life to studying aviation safety, his daughter was able to use that knowledge when it mattered most. Third, we should never give up, even in impossible situations. When both engines failed, most people would have assumed they were going to die. But Emma believed there was a solution, and she was brave enough to try it. Fourth, we should honor those who came before us. Emma honored her father by studying his work and keeping his legacy alive. Because of this, his ideas were able to save lives even after his death. Finally, preparation meets opportunity. Emma had spent 2 years studying her father's notebooks. She never thought she would actually use that knowledge. But when the moment came, she was ready. This taught everyone that we should always be learning and preparing, even if we don't know when or how we'll use what we learn. Today, Emma Parker is considered one of the greatest aerospace engineers of her generation. She has won numerous awards, including the National Medal of Technology and the Wright Brothers Medal. She has published books about aviation safety. She has helped design safer aircraft systems used around the world. But if you ask her about her greatest achievement, she doesn't talk about her awards or accomplishments. She talks about Flight 829. She talks about the 284 people who went home to their families that day. She talks about the children who grew up, got married, and had children of their own. She talks about all the lives that continued because she remembered what her father taught her. And every time she tells the story, she ends the same way. I didn't save Flight 829 alone. My father saved that plane. Captain Reynolds saved it. His co-pilot saved it. We all saved it together. And that's the real lesson. The greatest achievements come when we build on the knowledge of those who came before us, work together in the present, and think about the future. The story of Flight 829 reminds us that heroes come in all ages. Sometimes a 16-year-old girl with a backpack full of her father's notebooks can do what seems impossible. Sometimes knowledge passed from parent to child can save hundreds of lives. And sometimes the most important preparation we do is for a moment we never expect to come. Emma's father, Robert Parker, may have died in an accident. But his legacy lived on. His research saved 284 people. His teachings inspired his daughter to become a great engineer. And his story reminds us all that the work we do, the knowledge we share, and the love we give to our children can echo through time in ways more powerful than we ever imagined. This is the true story of Flight 829, the plane that lost both engines at 40,000 feet, and the remarkable teenager who said 5 simple words that changed everything: I know how to land this.